r/ask Reddit. What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips his food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales, and the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized, said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. I worked with a guy who'd interrupt any conversation to talk about anything as if he was the expert. And I don't use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about anything, including things he had never heard of or obviously didn't know much about. When the subject being discussed was something in the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original discussion to something he would like to talk about at the moment. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% of him just talking non-stop. Everybody else was way too polite and against conflict to say anything, including me, so most people just tried to stay away from him, but he'd follow people around. I eventually left, but I even remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. I worked with a guy like that. My favorite was he would jump in. Speaking of X, that reminds me of insert totally unrelated item and super long story, and it got to the point the rest of the team just stopped talking. I thought I was desultory until I met this guy. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5 shits a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back, and triumphantly announce that's shit number 3, ducking Daniel. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my 3rd day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. I was a research assistant at a mortgage firm. Whoa. Had this same situation. We had a full maintenance crew, but my department had previously helped with parking lot trash until our hours were cut, which was discussed and mandated from corporate. The top guy for our location came in extra early, picked up the parking lot trash, and dumped it on my desk. Then he berated all of the managers in front of everyone for my department. Just the tip of the iceberg when it came that a-hole, though. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or 2 and we had no idea who was responsible. My co-workers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Chanel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the Chanel Bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. My worst co-worker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this co-worker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. Duck Walmart, and duck that beach for almost getting me arrested. My co-worker likes to initiate conversations, then does long pauses where you go to say something back. Then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in. Ends up riddled with spelling mistakes while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately, it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. My boyfriend does that weird conversation thing. Sometimes I just try to talk over him. Sometimes I'll leave the room. He still doesn't know what I'm talking about when I bring it up. My current suspicion is he's formulating the next sentence during that pause. Either way, it drives his mum and I insane. He would walk in every day like it was his first day with no memory of anything we showed him the previous day. He was only focused for the first 30 minutes, then the rest of the time would be on his phone and try to work with one hand, which is bad because I work in a restaurant. Can't cook with one hand, but that didn't stop him from trying. Then one day he just stopped showing up for like a week, then was confused when he came back and was fired. Edit. I'm not sure if he had memory issues or anything like that. At least he didn't tell us or the owner. He did however like to talk about how easy our job was because he'd had 4 other restaurant jobs before this one. He was only 19. But we didn't make him do anything complicated, but he would forget easy things like where we kept burger buns or where buttons were on the register. Also, he always left trash laying around after he was done with a job. It would be me and my other co-workers who cleaned up after him, and his excuse was always that he didn't think it mattered because it was gonna get cleaned up eventually. He still comes in every once in a while to watch our TV. Sometimes with friends and sometimes by himself. He never buys anything, but he just does it quietly so no one bothers him. I had a packager operator I worked with on the machine I run. He did okay, but every Monday I would have to basically retrain him on the packager controls. I guess he had an excuse though, because he had it be from a motorcycle wreck years before. Once I jogged his memory, he did good for the rest of the week. He creeped the duck out of all the girls at work, and then it came out he had stalking and sexual assault charges pending outside work. Fired that day. I had a guy at work make a bunch of gross comments in a full break room. My husband was sitting in the break room waiting for me. Heard all of it. I walked right into HR and listed the 30-some people in this normally really quiet lunch room. That dude was so gross. Did they fire him? Yes. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall. Gossip. Then call those people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for shit she did wrong. She was so arrogant, and she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. I worked somewhere in the last 3 years where they hired a secretary. WHO refused to use a computer. I couldn't fucking believe it. In this day and age. Back when I worked at a restaurant, I was friends with the bartender. Chill dude. Right up until they made him manager, and that small amount of power and increase in pressure made him so angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was shit at my job because I didn't do a thing that I've never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus so I couldn't get home. It was pitch black outside and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst co-worker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a shit worker. He was just stressed and didn't know how to handle it, I suppose. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. They pay you complete shit and work you so hard it tears you body and mind up. I just graduated high school and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy I work with, we nicknamed Big Matt since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked. But this 35-year still lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking in her being raped, and ever since then he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse. He just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a ducking idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 co-workers didn't show up. So I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. Next day, one of the co-workers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an O of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. So before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6-foot-some-odd-inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch of her life for calling the cops on him. Next day I looked him up, and sure enough he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst co-worker out of all the ones I faced. What was the other Matt like? He was just an alcoholic, lived in a local motel. In his defense, his rent was really cheap per week. Worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay on the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words, sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. Every time I think I'm a duck up, I read stories like this and I feel better about myself instantly. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working at a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King, but without the lettuce because that's rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day, and was confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently if he ate corn he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He would tell me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time, along with many other theories that came from his gut. One day we got into a political argument before the 2016 election where he said if Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war, and I will not hesitate to kill you and your family. Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. With that diet, I wouldn't trust anything that comes from his gut. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way, and not to ask questions because I should already know what to do. I had just gotten the position. My wife talked about a supervisor her first husband had. When he, the husband, had an idea about improving their methods, the supervisor, who had a really strong Chicago accent, think of Saturday Night Live, the Bears, would say you don't stink, I think, and you do. Fast food. Third shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. How TF do you afford coke on a fast food paycheck? You sell drugs to cover most of your living costs via cash, then pay essential bills with your legit income. I work with this guy that tries to convert people to his religion every day. It's super annoying. I worked with a really nice guy at my old job, added him on FB. Multiple Bible study videos every day. He didn't say anything about religion at work. That's how you do it. I'm pretty cool about people all have their role to play, but one time we had a secretary that would microwave eggs and canned tuna every morning in a bowl. Now, I am not a violent person, but the smell generated from microwaved eggs and canned tuna is downright repulsive by anyone's standards. Oh man. Reminds me of a story where I used to work. A girl there used to microwave tuna 3 times a week, and it was an old building with windows that didn't open because of 50 years of paint accumulated on the hinges. Me and the workshop manager decided to relocate the microwave to a more ventilated area, out in the warehouse. By the door, we knocked up a bracket in the workshop and screwed it down over the microwave so it couldn't be brought back to the main wing of the building. I worked in a place similar to YMCA. They hired a tramp gym coach who was great at those things, but somewhere along the line she also picked up reception shifts. She was also dyslexic. This meant I would get emails I couldn't read with phone messages for obviously wrong names and phone numbers without enough digits, or when I called them turned out to be wrong numbers. The workplace was too scared to move her off reception in case it was discrimination. There was plenty of other work to be done. She didn't need to be fired or anything, so instead of taking a job that wasn't meant to be her job off her, the rest of us had to cop abuse from upset clients because we weren't going to blame her mild disability for us not calling them back. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.